Welcome, brave soul, I am the Forgotten Storyteller. Before we begin, tap that like button if you dare, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're listening from. And if you make it to the end of this video, I hope to see you in the next story. I hope you're ready, because I am. Let's begin. The wind howled like a banshee through the ancient oaks of Windsor Forest, a mournful symphony that mirrored the gnawing unease in Liam's gut. Rain lashed against the windshield of his battered Land Rover, each drop a tiny hammer blow against his fraying nerves. He was miles from anywhere, deep within the Royal Park, a place he'd only ever seen from a distance, a hushed rumor of history and privilege. Tonight, however, he was its reluctant inhabitant, chasing a ghost. Liam wasn't a believer in folklore. He was a pragmatic man, a freelance investigative journalist more comfortable with spreadsheets and redacted documents than spectral legends. But this story, this damned, impossible story, had a gravitational pull he couldn't resist. Herne the Hunter, the ghost of Windsor Forest, a spectral huntsman with antlers sprouting from his brow, riding a phantom steed, a harbinger of doom or a guardian of the realm, depending on which whispered tale you believed. His contact, an eccentric local historian named Agnes, had insisted. "You won't find it in any official record, dear boy," she'd rasped over the crackling phone line, her voice thick with anticipation. "But the old ones, the ones who remember the land, they feel him. Especially when the storms roll in. And tonight, Liam, tonight feels heavy." He'd scoffed, of course. Yet here he was, the storm an almost theatrical backdrop, the wind tearing at the trees with a ferocity that felt unnatural. He'd parked the Land Rover at the edge of a dense thicket, the narrow track swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Agnes had given him precise directions, a convoluted string of turns and landmarks that sounded more like a treasure hunt than a journalistic assignment. He killed the engine, plunging the immediate surroundings into a profound silence broken only by the storm's fury. The air was thick and cold, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. Liam grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and a digital recorder, his heart thudding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. This was madness. Utter, complete madness. He stepped out, the wind immediately whipping his jacket around him. The trees loomed like skeletal sentinels, their branches clawing at the bruised sky. He switched on the flashlight, its beam a weak assertion against the overwhelming darkness. He began to walk, his boots crunching on the sodden ground. The path, if it could be called that, was barely discernible. He followed Agnes's instructions, weaving through the dense woodland, the rain soaking him through within minutes. He spoke into the recorder, his voice a low murmur. Journal entry 23:17 hours. Location, Windsor Great Park. Objective, investigate local legend of Herne the Hunter. Current conditions, severe thunderstorm, gale force winds. Subjective assessment, extreme idiocy. He almost laughed, a shaky, involuntary sound. But then a new sound cut through the din of the storm. A low, guttural baying, distant yet clear. It wasn't the howl of the wind. It was the sound of hounds. Liam froze, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to flee to the relative safety of his vehicle. But the journalist in him, the insatiable curiosity that had driven him to this forsaken place, held him rooted. He continued deeper into the woods, drawn by the eerie chorus. The baying grew louder, more insistent. And with it, another sound began to emerge, a rhythmic, thunderous beat that seemed to shake the very earth. The pounding of hooves. He broke through a curtain of dripping branches and found himself on the edge of a vast, open clearing. The storm seemed to intensify here, the wind whipping the trees into a frenzy. And then he saw it. A figure silhouetted against the lightning-riven sky. A mounted rider, impossibly tall, his form cloaked in shadow but unmistakably there. And from his head, crowning his spectral brow, two enormous, branching antlers, gleaming with an unholy luminescence. The rider's steed was a phantom, its outline blurred, its hooves striking sparks of ethereal fire onto the sodden ground. And around them, a pack of ghostly hounds, their spectral forms rippling like smoke, their baying a chilling symphony of the hunt. Liam's breath hitched in his throat. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't some elaborate hoax. This was Herne the Hunter. Agnes had been right. The spectral procession swept across the clearing with terrifying speed. The rider's head turned, and for a fleeting moment, Liam felt an unseen gaze fall upon him. It wasn't the gaze of a man, but something ancient, primal, and utterly ruthless. A chilling awareness washed over Liam, a primal fear that clawed at his sanity. This being, this entity, was not of this world. The apparition continued its phantom hunt, disappearing into the impenetrable darkness on the far side of the clearing. The baying of the hounds slowly faded, leaving Liam alone once more, trembling, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He fumbled for his recorder, his hands shaking so violently he could barely operate it. I saw him, he stammered, his voice hoarse. I actually saw him. Ern the Hunter. It's real. Agnes was right. It's all real. He backed away slowly, his eyes darting into the surrounding darkness, expecting the spectral rider to reappear at any moment. He needed to get back to the Land Rover, to get out of this place, to process what he had just witnessed. As he turned to retrace his steps, a new sound snagged his attention. A faint, almost imperceptible rustling from the undergrowth behind him. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Nothing. Just trees and dripping leaves. But the rustling persisted, moving with a deliberate, creeping sound. It was closer now. Too close. He shone the light directly at the source of the noise, and his blood ran cold. Emerging from the shadows, not on a phantom steed, but on two gaunt, powerfully built legs, was a figure that mirrored the phantom rider. Antlers, thick and gnarled, sprouted from its head, casting horrid shadows in the flashlight beam. Its eyes glowed with an eerie emerald light, fixated on Liam with an unnerving intensity. It was him. Ern. But human-sized and terrifyingly present. Liam stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest like a trapped bird. This wasn't a legend anymore. This was a terrifying, tangible threat. Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. The figure didn't speak. It simply took another step forward, its movements unnervingly fluid, silent despite the sodden ground. The antlers seemed to pulse with that same unholy luminescence he had seen on the spectral rider. Liam fumbled for a weapon, anything. His flashlight felt pathetically inadequate. He remembered Agnes's words about a pact with the devil, about supernatural hunting powers. Was this the source of those powers? The figure lunged. Liam reacted on pure instinct, dropping the flashlight and scrambling away. He heard a sickening thud as the spectral hunter's antlers slammed into the tree where he had been standing moments before. He didn't look back. He ran. He ran through the rain-lashed forest, the ghostly baying of hounds a chilling echo in his ears, though he knew the sound was only in his mind, a psychological imprint of what he had witnessed. He could feel the presence behind him, the unnatural swiftness of his pursuer, a terrifying awareness of the chase. He burst out of the trees and onto the track, the dim outline of his Land Rover a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. He fumbled with the keys, his fingers numb with cold and terror. The engine roared to life, a blessed, mechanical sound. He slammed the gearshift into reverse, tires spinning on the muddy track, the headlights illuminating the edge of the woods. And there, standing just beyond the tree line, was the figure. Ern. His head tilted, those luminous antlers catching the headlights, a silent, chilling sentinel. Liam didn't hesitate. He floored the accelerator, the Land Rover lurching forward, bouncing violently over the uneven ground. He drove as fast as he dared, the rearview mirror a constant source of dread. He kept expecting to see the spectral rider or the antlered figure gaining on him. He finally reached the main road, the tarmac a welcome sight. He didn't stop until he was miles away, the lights of a small town twinkling in the distance. He pulled over, his body shaking uncontrollably, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of disbelief and terror. He looked down at his hands, still clammy and trembling. He had come looking for a story, for a sensational headline. He had found something far more unsettling, something that had shaken him to his core. Ern the Hunter. The ghost of Windsor Forest. It wasn't a story. It was a terrifying reality. He picked up his recorder, his fingers still unsteady. He pressed the play button, the sound of his own terrified whisper filling the car. Journal entry 23:48 hours. I saw him. He's real. And he's not just a ghost. He's hunting. The wind outside still howled, but now, to Liam, it sounded less like a storm and more like the echo of a spectral horn, a chilling reminder of the ancient hunter and the darkness that still stalked the heart of Windsor Forest. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would never look at the ancient woods the same way again. And he knew, with a creeping dread, that the hunt might not be over. Time for the next story. Guys, if you liked that last story, please don't forget to leave a like. Thank you. The wind, a relentless Yorkshire banshee, shrieked around the ancient stones of Knaresborough, clawing at the worn tweed of Detective Inspector Thomas Croft. He hunched deeper into his coat, the salt spray from the North Sea carried a surprising distance inland, stinging his eyes. He was here for a missing person, a ritualistic disappearance, rumor whispered, tied to the very fabric of this place. His boots crunched on the gravel path leading towards the infamous dropping well. The air grew heavy, damp and cloying, carrying the faint, unsettling aroma of sulfur and something else. Something mineral, ancient, almost alive. Tourist brochures, bleached and tattered by the elements, still babbled about the well's petrifying properties, a quaint curiosity. But Croft had dug deeper, beyond the cheerful postcards. He'd found hushed stories, local folklore that spoke of a darkness clinging to this place, a connection to a woman who predated even the oldest tombstones, Mother Shipton. The disappearance of Sarah Jenkins hadn't been a simple runaway. The 28-year-old artist, known for her fascination with local history and folklore, had vanished from her cottage 2 weeks ago. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. Just an empty room, a half-finished painting of the dropping well on her easel, and a single peculiar item left on her bedside table. A crudely carved wooden doll, its face contorted in a silent scream. Croft's sergeant, the ever-skeptical Miles Corbin, had dismissed the doll as a macabre artist's prop. But Croft felt it in his gut, a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with a distressed artist and everything to do with the chilling tales of Ursula Southeil, the woman they called Mother Shipton. Born in a cave, reputedly monstrous of appearance, a witch whose prophecies were as terrifying as they were accurate, the Great Fire of London, iron ships sailing the seas. Croft wasn't one for superstition, but Knaresborough under a brooding sky felt like a place where the veil between worlds was perilously thin. He reached the well. The water dripped, a slow, rhythmic thud, onto the moss-covered formations below. It created an eerie, almost hypnotic symphony, a soundtrack to the decay and preservation that characterized the site. Everywhere, objects hung suspended in time, transformed into stone. A child's shoe, a forgotten umbrella, a bird's nest. The air vibrated with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of age and power. He spotted Sarah's ex-boyfriend, Mark Thompson, loitering near the entrance to the cave that was reputedly Mother Shipton's birthplace. Thompson, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, looked like he'd been waiting. D.I. Croft, Thompson grunted, his voice rough. Thought you'd have given up by now. Still looking, Mr. Thompson. Anything new to report? Croft kept his tone neutral, his eyes scanning the man. Thompson had a history of anger management issues, and Sarah's friends had mentioned their recent, acrimonious breakup. Nothing that'll help you find her, Inspector. She was eccentric, always going on about this cave, about Mother Shipton. Said she felt a connection. Thompson spat onto the wet ground. Probably just got lost in her own head. Or someone helped her get lost, Croft countered, watching Thompson's reaction. The man's jaw tightened, but he offered nothing more. Croft decided to explore the cave itself, the legendary birthplace of the 16th century prophetess. The entrance was narrow, a jagged maw in the rock face. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying sweetness of decay, mingling with the sharp tang of mineral deposits. The walls were slick with condensation, and the drip, drip, drip of water echoed in the confined space. The light from his torch danced across strange, mineral formations, twisting and contorting into shapes that, with a flicker of imagination, resembled grotesque faces. He found it near the back, tucked away in a recess, a cluster of small, crudely carved wooden figures, all arranged in a circle, their faces mirroring the silent scream of the doll found in Sarah's room. And in the center of the circle, a single, petrified feather. A raven's feather, he guessed, by its size and shape. As he reached for it, a voice, raspy and ancient, slithered from the darkness. You seek what is not meant to be found, Inspector. Croft spun around, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. The torch beam swept across the cave, revealing nothing but dripping rock. Who's there? A low chuckle, dry as a desert, answered him. A guardian. Of secrets best left undisturbed. This is a police investigation, Croft stated, his voice firm despite the tremor of unease that snaked up his spine. And I'm looking for a missing person. And you believe the old woman can help you? The voice whispered, closer now. Ursula knew secrets, and some secrets can consume those who pry too deeply. The darkness seemed to press in on him. He felt a chill that was as cold as ice. He remembered the prophecies, the way they spoke of a world transformed, of iron ships and fiery skies. What if Mother Shipton's prophecies weren't just predictions, but warnings? Or worse, instructions? He retreated from the cave, the disembodied voice a chilling echo in his ears. Back in the open air, Miles Corbin was waiting, looking impatient. Anything, Tom? Something's not right here, Miles. This place, it feels wrong. Croft recounted what he'd found, the dolls, the petrified feather, the voice. Corbin scoffed. A voice? You're starting to sound like Sarah Jenkins, Tom. It's a cave, it's got acoustics. And the dolls are probably some local weirdo's idea of a prank. But Croft couldn't shake the feeling. He decided to delve into Sarah's research. Back at the station, Sarah's cottage yielded a treasure trove of notebooks, filled with meticulous notes on Mother Shipton, local folklore, and the history of Knaresborough. One passage, underlined multiple times, caught his attention. Ursula Southiles spoke of a time when the world would be bound by iron chains, when the very air would carry whispered words. She saw the future, but she also understood the past. There is a power here tied to the earth, to the water that turns all to stone. A power that can both preserve and destroy. Another entry detailed a particularly chilling prophecy. When the blacksmith's forge is replaced by the lightning strike, and the iron horse gallops without its rider, then shall the old ways awaken, and a price shall be paid for forgotten sins. Croft felt a surge of comprehension. Sarah wasn't just interested in history, she was trying to understand the prophecy. The iron horse without a rider? A train? The lightning strike replacing the forge? Electricity? She was piecing together the puzzle of Mother Shipton's predictions, believing they held a deeper, more immediate meaning. He found a loose floorboard in Sarah's studio. Beneath it lay a worn leather-bound journal. Inside, Sarah had meticulously documented her own experiences at the dropping well. She described feeling an overwhelming presence, a sense of ancient knowledge seeping into her. She wrote of visions of a dark figure with luminous eyes, offering her understanding in exchange for a dedication. The journal entries grew increasingly manic. She believed Mother Shipton was not just a seer but a conduit, a gatekeeper to a primal energy that could reshape reality. She was convinced she had found a way to access this power, to understand the prophecies not as distant events, but as forces that could be manipulated. The last entry, written in a shaky hand, sent a shiver down Croft's spine. The well calls to me. The old woman's promise is real. I will be one with the stone, a vessel for her knowledge. My sacrifice will unlock the future. Sacrifice. The word echoed in Croft's mind. He remembered the wooden dolls arranged in a circle. A ritual. He knew he had to return to the dropping well, and this time he wouldn't go alone. He called for backup, a team equipped with emergency gear and clear instructions. Tread carefully and expect the unexpected. As they approached the well, the wind had died down, leaving an oppressive silence. A thick fog had rolled in, obscuring the landscape and lending an even more spectral quality to the already eerie surroundings. The familiar dripping sound seemed amplified, a relentless drumbeat in the unnatural quiet. They found no one. Corbin, his skepticism waning, looked unnerved. This is something else, Tom. Croft's gaze was fixed on the dropping well. The water continued its ceaseless descent, but something had changed. The usual mineral formations were obscured by a fine, shimmering mist rising from the water's surface, a mist that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. And then he saw it. Emerging from the mist, slowly, agonizingly, was a figure. It was draped in what looked like a shroud, its form indistinct, shimmering. As it solidified, Croft's blood ran cold. It was a woman, her features distorted, her skin appearing to be made of living stone. Her eyes, however, burned with an otherworldly luminescence, a chilling echo of the description of Mother Shipton herself. You interfere, the stone woman's voice rasped, the sound like pebbles grinding against each other. The world is to be remade, and you stand in its way. Croft raised his weapon, his hand steady despite the terror that threatened to engulf him. Sarah Jenkins is missing. What have you done to her? The stone woman's lips, cracked and dry, parted in a semblance of a smile. She understood. She embraced the transformation. She is becoming one with the earth, with the power that flows beneath. She is the first stone in the new edifice. As she spoke, the mist around the well began to churn more violently. The dripping water seemed to accelerate, and the very air crackled with energy. Croft saw, with sickening clarity, the truth of Sarah's last journal entry. Her sacrifice. She hadn't been taken. She had offered herself, seeking to become part of this ancient, terrifying power. This is madness. Croft shouted, the words swallowed by the burgeoning elemental fury. The stone woman raised a hand, and a cascade of water, unnaturally heavy, surged towards them. It didn't fall, it flowed, a liquid wave imbued with the well's petrifying magic. Croft and his team scrambled back, the spray hitting their boots and instantly turning the gravel to shimmering, gray stone. The old ways awaken, the stone woman hissed, her voice filling the air. The future is carved in stone. The petrifying mist expanded, engulfing the area around the well. Croft saw his team members caught in its ethereal embrace, their shouts turning into choked gasps as their forms began to calcify, their features freezing in expressions of horror. He fired his weapon, the bullet striking the stone woman's chest with audible thuds, but leaving no mark. She simply absorbed the impact, her luminescent eyes burning brighter. Croft knew then that this wasn't a case he could solve with logic or force. He was facing a force beyond human comprehension, a power whispered about in prophecies, a power that had claimed Sarah Jenkins and was now claiming his team. He turned and ran, the chilling laughter of the stone woman, the spectral echo of Mother Shipton, pursuing him through the encroaching fog. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The legend of Mother Shipton, once a historical curiosity, had become a terrifying, present reality, and he was just another witness to its horrifying, petrifying power. The wind, rising again, carried with it the scent of sulfur and the chilling promise of a world irrevocably transformed, carved into the unyielding, eternal stone. Time for the next story. Guys, if you liked that last story, please don't forget to leave a like. Thank you. The biting November wind whipped Amelia's hair across her face, stinging her eyes and making her wish she'd worn a thicker cloak. She clutched the worn leather reins, her knuckles white, and urged her mare, Bess, forward. They were miles from the relative warmth and safety of her village, deep within the skeletal branches of Chadbrook Forest. The air here was different, heavier, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and unsettling. Amelia was not a fool. She knew the stories, the hushed whispers around hearth fires, the fearful warnings from the village elders. Chadbrook Forest was a place best avoided, especially after dusk, and it was fast approaching dusk. But necessity, as it so often did, had overruled caution. Her younger brother, Thomas, lay feverish and weak, and the village apothecary, Old Master Hemlock, was out of the vital willow bark tincture. The only other known source, the reclusive herbalist who lived beyond the forest's edge, was her last hope. She tried to convince her father to go, but a recent fall had left him with a badly sprained ankle, and her mother, terrified of the forest, refused to venture out alone. So Amelia, despite her own churning stomach, had volunteered. She told herself it was just a story, the corpse roads, and the phantom lights, tales spun to keep children from straying too far. Yet, as the last rays of sunlight bled through the canopy, casting long, distorted shadows, a primal fear began to take root. The path they were on was narrower than she remembered, barely more than a deer trail, winding through the dense undergrowth. It was, she recognized with a jolt of dread, one of the old corpse roads. The locals called them the paths of the dead. They were the ancient routes, predating the villages themselves, used in centuries past to transport the bodies of those who died in isolated hamlets or were deemed too cursed to be buried in consecrated ground. These were the paths where the restless souls of the departed were said to linger, where phantom lights danced in the gloom, and where the silence was broken only by the chilling echo of ghostly monks chanting forgotten rites. A shiver traced its way down Amelia's spine, unrelated to the cold. She'd always been sensible, pragmatic. But here, surrounded by the oppressive silence and the looming trees that seemed to breathe with a life of their own, her skepticism felt like a fragile shield against an invisible force. Bess, usually a steady and placid mare, grew skittish. She tossed her head, wickering nervously, her ears swiveling, trying to catch sounds Amelia couldn't hear. "Easy, girl," Amelia murmured, patting Bess's neck. "It's just the wind." But even as she spoke the words, she didn't believe them. The wind, when it came, carried a mournful sigh, a sound that felt less like air through leaves and more like a lament from the earth itself. The path twisted sharply, and Amelia found herself on a wider, more defined track. This was the main corpse road she knew. It was said to be the most haunted, the most dangerous. The land here felt barren, the trees gnarled and skeletal, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. There were no birds singing, no rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth. Just an unnerving, profound stillness. Suddenly, Bess shied violently, rearing up with a terrified whinny. Amelia fought to maintain control, her heart leaping into her throat. She peered into the deepening twilight, her breath catching. Ahead, perhaps 50 yards away, a faint, flickering light bobbed erratically in the gloom. It wasn't the steady glow of a lantern, but a wavering, ethereal luminescence, like a firefly caught in a draft. Phantom lights. The stories were true. Amelia's hands trembled. The light seemed to be moving, not along the path, but weaving through the trees off to the side, disappearing and reappearing, drawing closer. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, seized her. This wasn't just a spooky forest. This was a place where the veil between worlds was thin. She urged Bess forward, desperate to put distance between them and the spectral glow. The mare, sensing Amelia's panic, broke into a canter, her hooves thundering on the packed earth. Amelia risked a glance back. The light was still there, closer now, and she could have sworn she saw the faint outline of a figure moving within its luminescence. A hooded figure, perhaps? Or something less defined, a shape coalescing from the mist. Her mind raced. She had to get through this. Thomas needed her. She focused on the path ahead, on the rhythm of Bess's stride, trying to block out the growing sense of being watched, of being followed. Then she heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound, almost too low to distinguish from the wind. Chanting. Low, guttural, and utterly alien. It seemed to emanate from the very air around her, a chorus of disembodied voices singing a hymn to death. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut for a brief, desperate moment, praying for strength. When she opened them, the phantom light was at the edge of the tree line, directly to her left, and the chanting seemed to grow louder, more insistent. She saw them then, fleetingly through the branches, spectral figures, robed and cowled, their faces lost in shadow, moving with an unnatural, gliding gait. Ghostly monks. Bess stumbled, her legs tangling for a terrifying second before she regained her footing. Amelia cried out, clinging to the mare's mane. The chanting intensified, the voices swirling around her like a vortex of sound. The phantom light pulsed, and for a chilling instant, it seemed to fix directly on her. She felt a probing coldness, a sense of unseen eyes dissecting her, judging her. She couldn't breathe. The forest seemed to press in on all sides, the trees closing ranks, the path narrowing to a claustrophobic tunnel. Panic threatened to consume her. She wanted to turn back, to flee, but the thought of Thomas, feverish and alone, spurred her on. Amelia yanked the reins, forcing Bess to veer away from the spectral procession, pushing deeper into the heart of Chad Brook. The chanting gradually receded, swallowed by the rustling leaves and the drumming of her own heart. The phantom light, however, remained a persistent, unnerving presence, a silent follower just beyond the periphery of her vision. She rode for what felt like hours, though the fading light suggested it was only a short time. The path continued its relentless winding, and the feeling of being pursued never quite left her. She began to notice peculiarities in the landscape. Patches of ground where nothing grew, even the hardy forest moss seemed to recoil. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their bark scarred and blackened as if by ancient fires. The very air felt charged, electric with a palpable malevolence. Then she saw it. A small, crumbling stone marker, half hidden by undergrowth. It was the boundary marker, the edge of the truly cursed land, the place where the corpse roads merged with the living world. Her heart leaped with a desperate hope. She was almost there. As she approached the marker, the phantom light, which had been keeping pace with her, flickered and died. The chanting ceased, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. Amelia paused, straining her ears, half expecting the supernatural escort to reappear. But there was nothing. Only the wind and the distant cry of her owl. She nudged Bess forward, crossing the invisible threshold. The quality of the air shifted almost immediately, becoming less oppressive, the scent of decay replaced by the cleaner, sharper smell of pine. The trees, while still dark, seemed less menacing. She broke free of the forest's oppressive embrace and saw it, a faint glow in the distance. The herbalist's cottage. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her knees weak. She urged Bess into a weary gallop, her thoughts now solely on Thomas and the precious tincture. The herbalist, a wizened old woman with eyes like polished onyx, listened to Amelia's plea with a quiet intensity. She understood the urgency, the fear that had driven Amelia into. She readily gave Amelia the dark, bitter liquid, along with a small pouch of dried herbs. "You took the old paths," the herbalist stated, her voice soft but knowing. It wasn't a question. Amelia nodded, too exhausted to lie. "I had no choice." The herbalist looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in her dark eyes. The dead do not rest easy on those roads. They do not suffer the living to trespass undisturbed. She paused, her gaze drifting towards the dark silhouette of Chad Brook Forest. The land remembers, and some places they never truly let go. Amelia didn't fully grasp the woman's meaning until she was riding back, the precious tincture clutched tightly in her saddlebag. She took the longer, safer route, the one that skirted the edges of Chad Brook. Yet, even at a distance, she could feel its looming presence, its silent, watchful gaze. She arrived home just as dawn was breaking. Thomas was still weak, but the tincture brought a flicker of life back to his eyes. As Amelia prepared the medicine, a sudden chill swept through the cottage despite the roaring fire. She looked towards the window, towards the direction of Chadbrook Forest, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment she saw it. A faint, wavering light, just on the horizon, as if reflecting from a distant, unseen source. Then it was gone. Amelia shivered, not from the cold, but from the chilling certainty that the paths of the dead were not just stories. They were real. And sometimes, even when you left the path, a part of it, and the restless spirits that dwelled there, could follow you home. The land around her village, built so close to those ancient haunted routes, was indeed cursed. And she, Amelia, had just learned that lesson firsthand. The memory of the chanting, the phantom lights, and the unnerving silence of Chadbrook Forest would forever be etched into her soul, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Time for the next story. Guys, if you liked that last story, please don't forget to leave a like. Thank you. The salty tang of the Dorset coast usually brought a sense of calm, a familiar balm to Elias Thorne's usually agitated nerves. But as he guided his sputtering rental car up the winding tree-lined drive towards Bettisco Manor, a prickle of unease crawled beneath his skin. The manor, a stoic silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, seemed to brood rather than welcome. It was the skull, of course, that had drawn him here. The screaming skull of Bettisco Manor. A morbid fascination, he admitted, but one that had consumed him for months. He'd read the whispers poured over the local folklore. A slave spirited away from Jamaica, his dying wish for his homeland denied by a cruel twist of fate, or perhaps by something far more sinister. His skull, now a permanent, unsettling fixture within the manor's ancient walls. They said it screamed. They said it howled. They said any attempt to move it, to grant it the peace it was denied in life, would unleash a tempest of unimaginable horror. Elias, a historian by trade, a skeptic by nature, felt a professional obligation to investigate. But in the deepening shadows, as the car's headlights caught the weathered stone of the manor, a sliver of something primal, something ancient and watchful, seemed to stir. The current custodians of Bettisco Manor were the Athertons, a family whose lineage was as deeply rooted in the land as the gnarled oaks surrounding them. Mrs. Penelope Atherton, a woman whose sharp eyes and even sharper tongue belied her frail frame, met him at the imposing oak door. "Mr. Thorne, I presume?" Her voice was a dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across flagstones. "I confess, I wasn't entirely convinced you'd make the journey." "Mrs. Atherton," Elias inclined his head, offering what he hoped was a disarming smile. "The legend of your resident is quite compelling." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Compelling, yes, that's right. And best left undisturbed. We've had enough excitement, thank you very much." The interior of the manor was a study in faded grandeur. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the heavy velvet curtains. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow Elias's every move. "The skull, Mrs. Atherton," Elias ventured, his voice carefully neutral. "Where is it kept?" Penelope gestured vaguely down a long, shadowy corridor. "In the old chapel. Or rather, what's left of it. It's there." The old chapel was more of a crypt, a damp, stone chamber that smelled of earth and decay. And there, on a small, tarnished silver pedestal, sat the skull. It was undeniably human, its bone bleached to an unnatural ivory. The sockets were empty, yet Elias felt an intense, unnerving sensation, as if a pair of spectral eyes were fixed on him. A tremor ran through the stone floor, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the skull itself. "Remarkable," Elias murmured, reaching for his notepad. "Remarkable and restless," Penelope corrected, her voice taut. "My late husband, Geoffrey, God rest his soul, tried to have it moved. To a proper burial, he thought. A dignified resting place." She shuddered. "The night he tried, the wind, it was like 1,000 voices screaming. The house shook. Pictures fell from the walls. Geoffrey swore he heard voices, whispering his name." Elias scribbled furiously, his skepticism warring with a growing sense of dread. "And what happened? We left it, and the screaming stopped. The winds died down. The house settled. We've learned our lesson." Over the next few days, Elias immersed himself in the manor's history, sifting through dusty archives, reading faded letters. He learned of the planter, a man named Silas, brought from Jamaica in the 18th century, his life a tapestry of hardship and servitude. Silas had died in England, far from the sun-drenched shores of his birth, his final wish to be buried on Jamaican soil a cruel impossibility. His remains had found their way to Bettiscombe, a morbid curiosity, a macabre heirloom. The legends of the skull's sentience were woven into the very fabric of the manor's history. Stories of inexplicable cold spots, of disembodied whispers, of objects moving on their own. Each tale, Elias noted, became more embellished, more terrifying with each retelling. One evening, a fierce storm rolled in from the sea. The wind howled, a mournful dirge that rattled the window panes. Elias found himself drawn back to the chapel, a flashlight in hand. The air within was frigid, a stark contrast to the warmth of the manor. As he approached the pedestal, the wind outside seemed to intensify, and Elias thought he heard it, a faint, high-pitched keening like a child weeping. He shone his flashlight on the skull. Its empty socket seemed to deepen, to draw him in. And then he heard it again, clearer this time. A whisper right beside his ear. "Home?" Elias stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a rational man. It was the wind, amplified by the acoustics of the chapel. It was his imagination, fueled by the pervasive atmosphere of the manor. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of a presence that was both ancient and intensely present. He spent the rest of the night in a state of agitated wakefulness, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within him. The following morning the storm had abated, leaving behind a pristine, sun-drenched landscape. The manor, however, felt different. A palpable tension hung in the air. Penelope Atherton was nowhere to be seen. Elias found her in the drawing room, her face ashen, her hands trembling as she clutched a porcelain teacup. "It's happening again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The wind, it's back." Elias stepped to the window. Outside, the trees were beginning to sway, a gentle breeze at first, then a gust, then a gale. The sky, moments ago a clear blue, was rapidly darkening, bruised clouds gathering with alarming speed. "What did you do, Mrs. Atherton?" Elias asked, his own voice laced with a fear he couldn't entirely suppress. "Nothing," she cried. "That's the problem, Mr. Thorne. Nothing. But last night, I heard it. The skull. It spoke to Jeffrey. In his dreams. It told him it wanted to go home." Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The legends were true. Or at least the feeling of them was. The skull, bound by some unseen force to this place, was stirring again. He knew with a terrifying certainty that he couldn't just leave. He had to understand. He had to do something. The historian in him demanded it. But the man in him, the man who had heard the whisper, the man who felt the watchful eyes, urged him to flee. Despite his better judgment, Elias found himself back in the chapel. The wind outside was a banshee's wail, hurling rain against the ancient stones. The skull sat on its pedestal, seemingly unmoved by the tempest. Elias, his hands slick with sweat, reached out. "Silas," he said, his voice a strained rasp. "I don't know what you want, but I want to understand." As his fingers grazed the cool, smooth bone, a jolt not of static electricity, but of something far more profound, shot up his arm. The empty sockets flared with an inner light, a bone-white luminescence. And then the screaming began. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound that ripped through Elias's very soul, a primal scream of anguish, of rage, of a centuries-old longing. It echoed from the depths of the skull, from the very stones of the chapel, from the heart of the manor itself. The room plunged into an unnatural darkness, the flashlight beam flickering wildly. Objects began to levitate, loose stones, rusted iron fittings, even the heavy pedestal itself. Penelope burst into the chapel, her face a mask of pure terror. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice lost in the cacophony. Elias could feel himself being buffeted, not by the wind, but by an invisible force. The air grew impossibly cold. He saw fleeting, spectral images, a plantation, whips cracking, a man's face etched with suffering. "Home. I want to go home," the voice boomed, no longer a whisper, but a thunderous lament that vibrated through Elias's bones. He knew in that moment that the legend wasn't just about a haunted skull. It was about a soul trapped, denied its final rest, its pain echoing through time. And that, perhaps, the only way to silence the screams was to grant Silas his dying wish, however impossible it seemed. Grabbing a heavy, iron-bound chest from a nearby alcove, a piece of forgotten history that perhaps contained something of Silas's original possessions, Elias, with a surge of adrenaline and sheer terror, wrestled the skull from its pedestal. As he did, the cacophony reached a crescendo, the very foundations of the manor groaning under the strain. "We have to get it out of here." Elias yelled at Penelope, his voice strained with effort. Together, they stumbled out of the chapel, the tempest raging around them, the skull clutched tightly in Elias's trembling hands. The manor seemed to unleash its fury upon them, doors slamming shut, timbers creaking as if about to splinter. They managed to reach Elias's car, the wind tearing at them, threatening to rip the skull from his grasp. He shoved it into the passenger seat, the luminescence momentarily flaring, casting an eerie glow on Penelope's terrified face. "Where are we going?" she screamed over the din. Elias didn't have an answer. Jamaica was a world away. But as he fumbled with the ignition, the engine roaring to life, he knew one thing with chilling certainty. He couldn't leave the skull at Betisco Manor. The screaming had followed him. And it would continue to follow, a haunting testament to a life denied peace, until its final wish, however impossible, was finally truly granted. The road ahead, shrouded in the storm's fury, beckoned, promising only more uncertainty, more terror, and the unfathomable quest to silence the screaming skull of Betisco Manor.
Ready for spine-chilling tales that will haunt your thoughts? Subscribe to Forgotten Storyteller for eerie narrations, unsettling mysteries, and haunting stories you won't forget. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story, because some stories refuse to stay buried. Join us, if you dare.